Hello and welcome to a new episode of Introduction to Ethics. In the last episode, I talked about utilitarianism and I gave a historical approach to this moral theory. In this episode, I'll talk about challenges for the utilitarian moral theory. As I have mentioned, utilitarianism can be divided into two subcategories, which are a theory of good and a theory of right. When it comes to the theory of good, according to utilitarianism, the ultimate good is happiness, which is the existence of pleasure and the absence of pain. And when we come to the theory of right, utilitarianism holds that something is right, or an action or policy is right, in as much as it maximizes the good, that is, happiness in this case. So first I'll talk about challenges for the theory of good, and then I'll talk about how we can pose challenges to the theory of right according to utilitarianism. The first challenge that I would like to talk about can be called the narrowness objection. According to the narrowness objection, happiness, which utilitarianism thinks is the ultimate good, is just one good among others. Besides happiness, knowledge, or great works of art, for instance, are good things regardless of whether they lead to happiness or not. So, according to this challenge, you might seek excellence for its own sake and not for the happiness that it gives you. For example, you can think of an artist who actually suffers in poverty to create great works of art. And you can think of the typical poor writer prototype for this type of thought experiment. According to this challenge, this writer who writes in poverty does not necessarily look for happiness or does not necessarily attain happiness when he or she is doing the job that he or she is doing. They are actually looking for excellence in their craft, in this case excellence in writing, for instance. So excellence in writing for this person is an end in itself, and it's not a means to attain more happiness. In response, the utilitarian theorist might say, you seek excellence either consciously or unconsciously for the happiness of others, for instance. This might be one possible response that a utilitarian might give as a reply to this challenge. But appealing to unconscious goals is not a good argumentative strategy. So let's drop that. And we know writers or other artists who do not always share their creations of art are not necessarily looking for happiness of other people. But maybe an artist needs to create art to express what they cannot express by other means. In this sense, creating art, although not bringing direct happiness, might bring some relief or avoidance of pain for the artist. So a utilitarian in this sense somehow can avoid the narrowness objection. It's not as strong as it first appeared to us. The second challenge might be called the agency objection, or the agency challenge, or the agency objection. So it says, according to this challenge, we say, what matters for us is not only the pleasures that we have, but the actions that give these pleasures. For instance, take the Matrix movie. In this movie, people are living in vegetative state in small capsules, and they are fed through their veins. And these people are made to believe that they live in a world that's like ours, but actually they are just living in those capsules, and nothing they think they do is real. In reality, they are living in these capsules, but they are made to believe that they are living in a world in a world that resembles our world. The actual world that these people are living is miserable. There's a constant war between humans and machines, and people live in dire straits. Even then, according to this movie, some people prefer the actual life to the easy life of the Matrix, to the easy life of the life in Matrix. And this is one reason, according to this movie, this is one reason people would not prefer the pleasures themselves, but people prefer the actions that lead to those pleasures. Because if you are living in the Matrix, if you are living in that capsule, you can actually feel the pleasures that you are not actually going through. Feel the pleasures of the actions that you are not actually committing. You're just lying down in a capsule. So this movie is one artistic argument in favor of the agency objection. As another evidence, we can think of the field of medicine. In the field of medicine today, doctors would not hide information from terminally ill patients, even though hiding information on their condition might let them spend happier time in their final months or years. So doctors today think that it's more important for these people to actually feel the pleasures if they are going to feel the pleasures, and not just go through some life that's not the real life for these people. There still seems to be something attractive about actually doing and not merely imagining to be doing what we believe to be doing. So this agency challenge or this agency objection against utilitarianism is one of the strong objections. Another challenge or objection is the evil pleasures objection. So clearly not all pleasures are good according to this objection. For instance, we can imagine a sadistic torturer having pleasure out of inflicting pain to a kid, right? Or we can think of the Roman Colosseum in which hundreds of people were cheering on the pains of a couple of slaves going through the struggle within the arena. So not all pleasures are innocent pleasures. Some pleasures are evil pleasures or malevolent pleasures. And utilitarianism has to distinguish between these two pleasures according to this objection. The next objection is the quality objection, which is somehow related to the evil pleasures objection, but it's also pointing at a different direction. So we ask in this objection, do all pleasures have the same value? Compare the pleasures of solving a difficult math problem to the one you get from playing a smartphone game. What if you take more pleasure from the game? Does this mean that playing the game is morally superior? So John Stuart Mill, was trying to qualify pleasures. So he was talking about quality of pleasures. He was saying that John Stuart Mill was holding that quality of pleasures matter besides their quantity. There are higher and lower pleasures according to Mill. One who has experienced both would not give up on the higher pleasure for any amount of the lower, according to Mill's defense. But in response to Mill, we can say that they are just different pleasures. One is not superior to the other. Even if one was higher, the pleasure of it would fade after a point, and you would need a small game break, for instance, in the example that I just mentioned. If we accept Mill's distinction, utilitarianism seems elitist. But on the other hand, if we reject the distinction altogether, we might have difficulty making policies or good life plans, so we still might need to qualify pleasures in some way. So this challenge is somehow not as strong as some other challenges. There is also the irrelevance objection. Think of a philosopher like Nietzsche, for instance. Nietzsche holds that happiness has nothing to do with morality. It's neither good nor bad. People do not strive for happiness. What they desire is facing challenges and overcoming them. And we can imagine the life of an overworked scientist, for instance. Such a scientist faces a tremendous amount of work, sometimes not enough sleep, sometimes they don't get enough sleep, and not always have much fun or pleasure in that sense. But they still seem to prefer this life to another. And it seems like happiness doesn't lead this scientist to pick the profession that they are picking. But the utilitarian can still hold that overcoming challenges, or at least the prospect of it, is what gives people the pleasure. So the utilitarian might somehow avoid this challenge. So these were the challenges against the theory of good for utilitarianism. Now I will mention challenges against the theory of right. These challenges, formulated for utilitarianism, are valid for a wider range of moral theories that are, in general, collected under the name consequentialism. According to consequentialism, an action or policy is right as long as it maximizes the good, and utilitarianism is one such theory. According to utilitarianism, the good is increased pleasures and reduced pains. Let me mention one objection. We can call this objection the scapegoat objection. Or we can also call it sometimes punishing the innocent person. So imagine this story. In a mid-sized town, a brutal crime is committed, but the criminal is not caught. The public is restless and they refuse to leave their homes unless necessary. Trade is affected, social life is affected, all forms of institutions are hindered. If the police chief, under these circumstances, just arrests a homeless innocent man and declares to have found the criminal, everyone would be happy and life would go back to normal. Otherwise, the conditions could have been even worse in the town. We can imagine an angry crowd marching through the town asking the police chief to find the criminal, or the crowd might even get out of control and even start harming streetlights and traffic signs and people's properties. It would actually be very beneficial to arrest the innocent man. It would be beneficial for more number of people. It will increase the pleasures of more number of persons. But it will still be unjust because we are just catching someone as if the person was criminal, although in fact the person is an innocent person. So in this case, in this challenge, utilitarianism seems to point at the unjust action as the right action. What might be a utilitarian rejoinder to this challenge or to this objection? In answering to this objection, utilitarians make a distinction between act and rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism is the original utilitarian view, holding that the right action or policy is one that increases happiness for all affected parties. Rule utilitarianism, on the other hand, holds that we have to find rules that maximize happiness for all affected parties in general, and not in particular instances. So rule utilitarianism seems to solve the scapegoat objection. The rule that says, for instance, never punish the innocent will bring more happiness for more number of people in general, not necessarily in particular circumstances. But this time, for some complicated particular cases, rule utilitarianism will not point at the right direction, which means it will not point at the direction which will increase the happiness for most number of people affected. And this could be a problem for rule utilitarians. There is also another challenge or another problem at this point. We can call this the problem of contingency. And probably the major objection against the utilitarian theory holds that this theory might reach the right moral answers for the wrong reasons. According to this criticism, even when the utilitarian approach gives the right answer to moral problems, this happens only contingently, and thus it's not a reliable approach to morality. Remember Mill's reasoning against the subjection of women. His arguments were based on the idea that such subjection makes man, the society in general, and the women less happy than they could otherwise be. So, if in an imaginary society women and all else were happy about such subjection, there would not be a utilitarian objection anymore. Critics do not find this result morally acceptable. Hence they say we need a theory that can encompass the idea of moral rights. I'll end this episode here, and in the next episode I'll talk about some applications of utilitarian theory.